Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to give everyone a couple minutes, so one or 2 minutes just to sign in, and then we will begin with today's program. Good afternoon for those of us joining. We'll begin shortly with introductions. Just giving a few people to sign in. Welcome to those of us who are joining right now. We're going to give everyone one more minute and we will begin. Welcome everyone who's been joining. We're going to give just a few more people just to come on in and we will begin today's program. So just to be respectful of everyone's time, we will begin. So welcome to today's program. As always, we're very delighted to have you all here today. My name is Bora Lachi, and I'm the Assistant Director of Programs and Director of Studies at the Tower Center. This is our final event of the semester. So in case you've missed any of our events in the spring, you can visit our YouTube channel, SMU Tower Center, to see our past events. Before I go on introductions and tell you a little bit how today's going to go, I want to thank our partners, the Mission Foods Texas Mexico Center, Japan Airlines, and the Japan American Society of Dallas-Fort Worth. I will first introduce our moderator, who will then introduce our speaker. After our speaker presents, we'll have a short moderated discussion followed by Q&A. So please enter all your questions in the Q&A function. It is now my pleasure to introduce Hiroki Takeuchi, who will be moderating today's event. Hiroki is a senior fellow at the Tower Center and director of the Sun and Star program on Japan and East Asia. Hiroki, I will now turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Bora. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, depending on where you are. So this is the last Sun Star webinar of this semester, but it will continue next semester, resuming in August. So, because this is the last one in this semester, I'd like to thank all the Tower Center staff members. And so starting with Bora, thank you for organizing all the events in the Tower Center. Actually, we didn't expect that we would have so many events after COVID. And then that was possible. Actually, we even organized even more events than usual. So thank you. Without you, we couldn't have organized any event. Also, the Reina Fidi, Jenny Aperti, Orisa Deras, thank you all for making Tower Center function. Also, it is led by Executive Director of the Tower Center, Luisa Del Rosal. Thank you. So also, I also want to thank today's partner institute, SMU Mission Foods, Texas Mexico Center. That is a Texas Mexico Center, we always emphasize, in the age that sometimes at least Texas interest is not consistent with Washington's policy, especially trade. Also, I'd like to thank Paul Pass of the Executive Director of Japan Society Dallas-Fort Worth. We are enjoying the partnership with the Japan Society Dallas-Fort Worth. Also, I thank Japan Airlines for their generous support for SMU Tower Center and SMU in Japan program at Kansei Gakuin University. Also, I'd like to acknowledge today we are honored to have Dr. Adolfo Laborde, the head of the Trade Office of Mexico in Japan. Also, we are supported by two consul generals. So Consul General of Hideo Fukushima, Consul General of Japan in Houston, and Consul General Paco de la Torre, Consul General of Dallas, of Mexico in Dallas. Thank you very much for your support for our programs. Today we are talking about Japanese investment in Mexican automotive industry. And I would say that Dallas is the best place to talk about this topic. As you may know, Toyota moved the North American headquarters to Dallas in 2017 for the reason that actually the global value chains and then Toyota's facilities in North America, from that perspective, Dallas is at the very center of their facilities of the North America. And that is the reason why Toyota has moved its headquarters to Dallas. But actually, Toyota is not the only Japanese company that moved the headquarters to Dallas. And also, Toyota is not also Japanese companies are not the only companies. American companies, Mexican companies, and then other foreign companies have many companies have facilities in Dallas. And then the reason is that actually Dallas location is really at the center of the global value chains or international production networks of their business activities. So Dallas is, we often call Dallas is the capital of NAFTA and the USMCA. So finally, but not least importantly, today's topic, Japanese investment in Mexican automotive industry. That is embedded in the production networks of North America. That is based on NAFTA, which is now called the called the USMCA. And to maintain the the global value chains to work, air cargo plays a very important role. And actually, air cargo is, with the development of air cargo, very active flight of the air cargo, international production networks are really working. So in that sense, we are supported by Japan Airlines, and Japan Airlines actually recently has increased the number of flights between Dallas and Tokyo despite COVID. Of course, they didn't increase the number of passenger flights, but actually they increased the cargo flights between Dallas and Tokyo. And then those a lot of the components of their air cargo are actually related to automotive industry, like an auto parts. So this is a great topic to have to discuss in Dallas. And then we have great speakers, two great speakers, best speakers that I can think of. Two economists from University of Guadalajara. And then the first speaker is Dr. Melba Farouk. Dr. Farouk has received a PhD from University of Colima in Mexico, and also receives a Master of Economics from University of Colorado at Boulder. The second speaker is Dr. Leo Guzman, also professor at the University of Guadalajara. He received a PhD of economics from the University of Guadalajara, and he receives a MA from Tokyo International University in Japan. So so I would like to now pass the floor to speakers. So we first have hear from Dr. Farouk, and then from Dr. Guzman. So now floor is yours, Dr. Farouk.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much, Dr. Takeuchi. I really want to thank SMU Itaú Center Zone and Start program for the invitation. I am very glad to be here this afternoon, this morning in Japan, and to share with you some of our findings in our research about Japanese investment in Mexico. We have been working with Dr. Leo Guzman for on this topic for the past 3 years. And so today we are going to talk about network Japanese investment in Mexico's automotive sector, which is one of the most important recipients of investment from Japan. And we are going to talk topics like cooperation, small and medium-sized enterprises, and challenges under the new USMCA. Next, please. The one before, please. In the content of my presentation, I will include the boom of Japanese investment in Mexico, Japanese investment and regional networks of production in North America mainly, in the transport equipment sector, small and medium enterprises and UMSCA, and some conclusions. Next, please. Okay, last year, Mexico and Japan celebrated the 15th anniversary of signing the partnership agreement in 2004. It entered into effect in 2005. And during these 15 years, investment has increased, especially since the agreement was signed. Here, as you may see, during the period of 2003 until 2019, about $30 billion in announced investment from Japan, and of those, $27 billion were applied. And mainly, and this is a characteristic of the Japanese investment, 83% of that is going to the manufacturing sector. And of that going to the manufacturing sector, 60% is on the transport equipment sector. The transport equipment sector includes final goods and intermediate goods, parts and components and automobiles. And Mexico has become the sixth producer in the world of automobiles. In 2020, we went down one place to seventh as a seventh producer, and Mexico is already the fourth exporter of transport equipment sector. So Japan is playing a very important role in the flows of trade in Mexico. I mean, the Japanese affiliates working in Mexico, both in our exports to the US and our imports from especially Asia, mainly in intermediate goods. So I'm going to go through this in the next features. Japanese investment has been concentrated mainly in what we call the Bajío region, in the states of Guanajuato, over there, Mazda, Toyota, and Honda had facilities there, and Nissan in Aguascalientes, for example. So during this period, from 2003 to 2019, 540 projects have been applied by Japanese affiliates in Mexico, and 43% of those projects went to the transport equipment sector. These projects have announced the creation of about 155,000 jobs, and 65% of those are in the transport equipment sectors. Other sectors that are receiving Japanese agriculture investment are electronics, metals and industrial equipment, logistics and chemical. Those are like 45% of the total investment. But the transport equipment sector has been the one that has received the most Japanese investment, and is forming this agglomeration of investment, especially in the center western part of Mexico, and also in northern states that started before, when Mexico and the US signed the NAFTA agreement. So these are the top 10 companies that have made investment in Mexico. It started with Nissan, and also over there we've found Toyota and Honda. Next, please. So Japanese investment, especially in the transport equipment sector, has a very important share in Mexican production, in sales, and in exports. These are measured in units. In units, the blue line is the production level, and the next one is the exports, and then sales. And as we can see in the small figures at the top right, in 2005, Japanese affiliates in the transport equipment sector participated with 23% of automotive production in Mexico. And in 2019, 31%. And in domestic sales, they participated with 27% of sales in the ET market, and in 2019, 41% is being occupied by Japanese affiliates. And in exports, from the share of Japanese producers went from 14% to 27%. That means that the US is one of our main markets, the main market of Mexico. 80% of our exports go to the US market. And that is the same for the transport equipment sector. And of every 3 cars that we export to the US, 1 is made by Japanese multinationals established in Mexico. So as exporters, we do have Mazda, Honda, Nissan, and Toyota. And Nissan is one of the most important, with about 60% of the production in Mexico. Next, please. Okay. How is this networked investment being formed in North America, and what has been the role of Japanese foreign direct investment in that network of production? And here we do have Japan is the blue circle. All the circles, the size of the circles represent the size of trade of those economies. The biggest one is the US. And here I included just the trade in intermediate goods in general, intermediate goods, parts and components. Japan has, in 2018 is the last figures available, Japan has 26,000 affiliates operating in the world. Of those 26,000 affiliates, 7,000 are in Asian countries, and another 7,000 are a bit more in China, and then the rest in Asia. And in Mexico, we do have more than 1,200 Japanese affiliates operating now. It used to be for many years like 350 Japanese affiliates, but in the past decade, I would say, they have increased to 1,200. And in the USA and Canada, we do have Japanese affiliates more than 3,000. So in the North American region, we do have more than 4,000 Japanese affiliates working. And they do have interfirm and intra-firm trade, exporting and importing intermediate goods and final goods. The size of the rows there represent the size of the intermediate goods being exchanged between, for example, Mexico and the US, the green ones, and they represent all the exports from Mexico in 2018, $157 billion of exports, and like $118 billion imports from Mexico. We do have with the US a surplus in intermediate goods, and also in the transport equipment sector, and in final goods in transport equipment sector. The role of Japan has been here as is playing an important role in our exports to the US, a country with we do have a surplus, as I said, but also the Japanese affiliates working in Mexico are having an important role in imports from Asian countries. And for example, Nissan Mexico can be importing parts and components from China, from Nissan working in China, for example. We know that many of the exports of China, not all of them are by Chinese enterprises, but by other enterprises established in China, and in Japan has 7,000 of those Japanese affiliates. So this is the kind of networking of production that has been formed in the North American region, and Japan is playing an important role. And for the US, this has been important because US exports to the rest of the world, even to NAFTA, transport equipment goods, final and intermediate, and these countries, Mexico, Canada, and USA, become more competitive by this type of exchange. And as we know, these global value chains right now comprise about 50% of the global trade, and they imply complex activities being related to how many times a part and component crosses the border. Some companies in Mexico have said that sometimes parts and component crosses the border like 8 times, for example, adding value added in each step. And so these kind of activities and organization of the multinationals by fragmentation of production and division of labor has this important impact on trade of goods, and that has been the case of Mexico. And now with the trade frictions between US and China and the COVID-19 pandemic has been a disruptive supply of critical inputs. And so right now, these kind of external shocks have important implications for Mexico in terms of relocation or nearshoring affiliates either from Japan or from other countries, mainly China, maybe to Mexico. And this in turn is with the object of lesser the risk of disruption. So all these types of global value chain networked production right now are kind of changing the environment here in Mexico and giving, I would say, some opportunities for bringing new investment or trying to that small and medium enterprises in Mexico join the global value chains. I will explain a little bit more about it. Next, please. And here, for example, is the imports of intermediate goods in the transport equipment sector. And these are figures from 1995 to 1918. And what we see here is that as a provider, the US has been losing share from 81% in 1995 to 60%. And East Asia, I included there Japan, South Korea, and China, is increasing its role. So right now with the USMCA and also with the pandemic and these new tendencies of regionalization, we may see that those 20% intermediate goods provided by East Asia will change maybe to a nearshoring location here in Mexico. That's a possibility. And so here is our surplus and deficits with NAFTA and now USMCA, but since I have until 2018, I just left NAFTA there. And in both intermediate goods and final goods, we do have a surplus with the US. And this surplus that we do have in the transport equipment sector represent a very high share of the total surplus that Mexico has with the US. And with East Asia, we do have a deficit, especially in intermediate goods, as I was saying. Next, please. Okay, with the rules of origin, now, as you may know, rules of origin have increased in the transport equipment sector from 60.5% to 75%. That will be in 4 years, from 2020 to 23, in parts to 70% and vehicles to 75%. And in steel will be 70% and aluminum 100%. And so this is a new challenge for the Japanese affiliates working in Mexico, because they have to increase this regional procurement, regional or local procurement. And so here I did an exercise with figure from the US National Highway Traffic Safety, the Transportation Ministry, that they do have information about the local and regional content of different models of multinationals in the transport equipment sector being sold in the US market. And in Mexico, this is for 2020, there were 20 models sold in the US market being assembled in Mexico, and in these Japanese models. And then there were 94 Japanese models being assembled in the US and sold in the US market. And so what is these figures are from, I'm taking the idea from Baldwin, comparing regional procurement with foreign procurement. And here in the case of Mexico, 55% of those models, of those 20 models, have a regional content of between 61 and 75%. So they have to work in order to reach the 75% by 2023. 25% of those models have a regional content less than 60%. So those have to work very hard. And then 20% have a regional content of North America greater than 75%. So they fulfill the requirement already of those 20 models. In the US, the 50% of those models, being Japanese models being assembled in the US, regional content is less than 60%, 50%. And 46%, the regional content is between 60 and 75%. So they have to work in order to achieve the 75% rule of origin from UNSCA. So what had been the reaction of these of the companies recently? Well, some have said relocation or nearshoring, or trying to reach more local suppliers. For example, Hitachi in Mexico, they say that they will link with more SMEs in Mexico. Sato will go through productivity solutions. Honda and General Motors will share platforms of vehicles in North America. Toyota said they will seek local suppliers. And Nissan, which is the most important Japanese multinational producing in Mexico, said in the first place they have the most efficient plant outside Japan in Mexico. And they have to compare the expenses related to relocate production. And we know that Nissan recently announced among its plans to rationalize production and also to reduce the number of models from 66 to 55. So maybe we will see Nissan, and as we saw in the graphic of production, one of the tendency in the last years of reduction is coming mainly from Nissan, that is rationalizing the production. So this is the main challenge in terms of rules of origin, but also USMCA includes another type of requirements referring to wages. They have to, the parts and components have to include 40% of those parts and components being produced under conditions of paying the workers $16 per hour. And right now, Mexico pays around $5 per hour. So some companies, what they have said is they are considering increasing, for example, wages like Kehin, Piolax, they have said that. And as we can see here in this graph from 2007 to 2018, employment in the transport equipment sector is right now very important. It has increased to near 1 million people engaged in this sector, and mainly in direct employment. Subcontracting is another challenge for enterprises working here, because the government just changed the rules of the game regarding subcontracting. And then this is the structure of the automotive sector in Mexico, and how these small and medium enterprises can be incorporated in the global value chains instead of becoming exporters. In Mexico, exports represented back in the 80s like 10% of GDP. Right now, they represent more than 30%, and imports too. So the openness of the Mexican economy is more than 60% right now. So Mexico is a big player as exporter and as an exporter. Mexico occupies like the 12th place among the main exporters of the world. But exports from Mexico are mainly concentrated in big enterprises because economies of scale are very important in flows of trade. And so small and medium enterprises in exports in Mexico participate with 4.5% as exporters, and they tend to live in 3 years. So the best way to incorporate the most productive small and medium enterprises in Mexico is for them to join the global value chains. Right now, according to these figures that are from APEC 2017, there were mainly Mexican companies in the tier 3 level of the global value chain structure in Mexico. That means more than 2,000 auto parts suppliers, mainly engaged in assembly, stamping, welding, plastic injection, and smelting. And so the big challenge is how to incorporate more of these small and medium enterprises in the global value chains. In Mexico, employment, the greatest contribution of small and medium enterprises is in employment, but just 5% of those small and medium enterprises are engaged in global value chains. And of that 5%, half of that is engaged in the transport equipment sector. So there is a challenge to engage more small and medium enterprises. And right now with the USMCA and with this, the effects of the pandemic, there are new opportunities to develop more of these small and medium enterprises in Mexico. We do have a good and Japanese affiliates in a survey that the Ministry of Trade and Economy does every year. They say that in Mexico, they find a well-trained labor force, and so the challenge is increase the number of small and medium enterprises engaged in the global value chains, and also try to upgrade these small and medium enterprises from tier 3 to tier 2 or tier 1. In tier 1, we just have foreign companies working there. And Japan has in total 400 companies working in tier 1 and tier 2. And in the top, in the original equipment manufacturers, we do have 20, and Japan is from Japan, Nissan, Toyota, Mazda, and Honda. So the other challenge is how to upgrade the small and medium enterprises to go in the upper ladder of this global value chain. And so in this sense, cooperation is a chapter in the agreement that we signed with Japan, not just for trade and investment, but also in cooperation. And of that, Dr. Leo Guzman will talk about and see how Japan is helping Mexico in order to develop suppliers, local national suppliers, and also how to train the labor force. Next, please. And as conclusions, Japanese foreign direct investment in the TS sector in Mexico has made an important impact on Mexico's trade flows, employment, and GDP growth in host states. The patterns of exports and imports in the TS sector in intermediate goods are indicative of the regional network of production in North America, where more than 4,000 Japanese affiliates operate in the region. Japanese affiliates base their procurement decisions on a networked investment pattern using local, regional, and extra-regional sources of intermediate goods. Brands assembled in Mexico are 20% regional content between 20% of those models between 70 and 80%, but the rest has to work in order to fulfill the rules of USMCA. New USMCA imposes stricter rules of origin and could induce more Japanese suppliers to establish in Mexico or develop local national suppliers. The challenges right now for Mexico with COVID-19, relocation could favor Mexico, and domestically foster development of Mexican SME suppliers to join the global value chain versus being exporters. Japan already has an active role through JICA and JETRO. Next. Thank you very much. And that is the book that we published in 2018 with Dr. Leo Guzman as editors, and we are working in another one right now.
Okay, thank you. So next speaker is Dr. Leo Guzman. For audience, if you have any question or anything to discuss, please write it in Q&A. And after Dr. Guzman's presentation, we will start discussion. Okay, Dr. Guzman.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Professor Hiroki Takeuchi, for the invitation and all the SMU Tower Center Sun and Star webinar series for letting me speak about the research that I've been doing the last couple of years. So in terms of the topic that I will speak about, is regarding Japanese automotive supply chains in Mexico, some issues regarding cooperation, externalities, and future challenges. So just as content for my talk, first I will give a brief overview of Mexico's automotive industry. After that, I will also move on to see what have been some of the trends of Japanese investment in the automotive sector for the case of Mexico, the case of cooperation and externalities, and some challenges and opportunities mainly for local endogenous suppliers. So in terms of Mexico's automotive industry, in general terms, if we take a look into global automotive production, since 2019, we were already seeing a slowdown in production. Between 2018 and 2019, there was a drop of 5%. And this drop was more increased to over 16% due to the COVID-19 pandemic. For the case of Mexico, we saw also a similar trend, a drop between 2018 and 2019 of 3%. And the drop by 2020 was of 21%. As Professor Melba was mentioning, 80% of total automotive production is exported, which makes Mexico the fourth global exporter. And from exports, 73% is concentrated in the North American market, US and Canada. And the industry is quite representative for Mexico's GDP. It represents 18% and it employs around 850,000 workers. So this is just an overview of where all these OEMs have located. As we can see, they are mainly concentrated in the northern and central and western region of Mexico. And as it has been mentioned, there are Japanese OEMs that have established mainly in the central western region of our country. So in terms of Japanese automotive investment, as we have seen in the previous talk, if we look at this increase in the number of companies that located in our country, 2019, there were around 400 firms of Japanese origin. And by 2020, this figure jumped to over 1,200 firms. 80% is concentrated in the manufacturing industry, and the automotive industry, or manufacturing FDI in the automotive industry, it represents 57%. And Japanese firms do contribute with around 40% of total automotive exports. Here's a brief representation of Japanese automotive suppliers in our country. And as we can see, they follow this type of agglomeration pattern in certain parts of the center and northern regions of Mexico. What are some of the main reasons for this increase in interest of Japanese investment in the automotive industry? Well, on the one hand, we know that Mexico serves as a strategic location, as an export base for the North American market, but also in certain cases for the South American market, mainly Brazil. The country has also experienced was experiencing a growing internal market up until the COVID-19 pandemic. And the country offers infrastructure, competitive cost, and qualified labor for this industry, as well as a macroeconomic stable economic and fiscal system. So in terms of the within Mexico location, something that we have been observing is that there is this agglomeration preference in terms of spatial and organizational integration. This need or preference to locate near OEMs, and also for Japanese automotive suppliers to locate within industrial parks, which seems to give this infrastructure that they require. Some of the benefits that come from this process is, on one hand, scale economies, lower transaction costs, and the possibility of cooperation and spillovers to other companies. So moving on to this cooperation and externalities section, first, as it has been also briefly discussed, one characteristic of the Mexican automotive industry is that it still imports more than half of the needed inputs at the tier 1 and tier 2 level of procurement. And this has become an issue and will do so in the future as the new regulations of the USMCA come into force, as it was mentioned by Professor Melba. From local content, endogenous firms only represent 30%. And there is this academic background that through foreign investment, we can achieve certain externalities in terms of technological, productive, or knowledge spillover. Although there's still lack of consensus, a growing number of authors do mention that it is related with a client-supplier relation or inter-industry relations, the presence of agglomeration of the foreign investment, and the use of intensive parts and components, all which are present in the automotive industry. So something that I've been studying the last couple of years, it was a project that was developed by the Japanese International Cooperation Agency, JICA. And this project was named a Project for Automotive Supply Chain Development in Mexico. It was implemented in 3 states, Querétaro, Guanajuato, and Nuevo León. And the main objective was to strengthen and develop tier 1 and tier 2 supply chains in those states. The main idea was to reach Mexican potential Mexican suppliers of Japanese automotive global value chains, and mainly at the tier 2 level of procurement. The project seeked to for the firms to adopt Kaizen philosophy and improve their QCD levels, in terms of quality, cost, and delivery times. It was developed in 3 phases between 2012 and 2015, and I had the opportunity to visit 6 participating firms that were from the state of Guanajuato, and 1 tier 1 Japanese firm, 3 tier 1 Japanese firms that were also located in Guanajuato and that were clients of these Mexican companies. So what are some of the main results that I was able to obtain from those company visits? All of the firms had some type of improvement in terms of quality and productivity, and this was very interesting. They learned how to take certain measurements and they showed improvement in this regard. Mostly all the firms increased their customers, and this was achieved because they were able to obtain certain industry certifications, which opened the doors to not only Japanese investors or potential clients, but companies from other origins as well. Almost all firms increased their sales, and some were even able to develop new products for the industry. Some of the negative effects that I was perceiving from those company visits, they were mostly external by nature. For example, increasing competition, the arrival of an increasing number of tier 2 companies, not only Japanese, but from other countries. And they were also mentioning the need or a strict customer demand, especially when dealing with Japanese clients. And one of the main problems that we are observing in the industry is that of employee rotation. Some of the externalities that I was able to observe in terms of tacit and explicit knowledge, all explicit knowledge was able to be internalized within the firms. How was internalized? Mainly through workflow diagrams, manuals, checklists, and other type of documents where the Mexican firms were able to integrate that knowledge within the company. Not all firms were able to internalize tacit knowledge, but some were able to do so. All the knowledge transfer channels were informal by nature. And something that was interesting was that all firms except one was able to spill over this knowledge to other product lines that they were that they had within the company. And just one of the companies was able to transfer this knowledge to another company that was within the same business group. So I think this was one of the main challenges for the project, how to increase this knowledge spillover, not within the firm, but to other firms for the region. The project did have an overall success, but also the presence of high employee rotation was limiting how companies were understanding all these Kaizen benefits. Companies also, as I was speaking with some senior positions in the company, they mentioned about these technological barriers. Sometimes they had trouble in terms of implementation and in terms of the time needed to implement certain manufacturing technology. And this, well, somehow limited the understanding of the Japanese manufacturing process. And despite that, all firms increase their QCD levels. When we spoke with those tier 1 Japanese suppliers, they mentioned that despite that, they still require even higher levels of the QCD than those agreed and achieved by the Mexican firms through the project. So what are some of the challenges and opportunities for local suppliers moving forward? First, as I was mentioning, the industry imports more than half of the inputs. So there's a window of opportunity for a domestic endogenous supplier, especially at the tier 2 level. And this will also be needed as we are starting to see a restructuring of global value chains to a more regional context by this process of nearshoring or reshoring. So there needs to be an improvement of quality and productivity by these potential Mexican suppliers to fill in this growing demand for local content. As we know, there's been an increase through the COVID-19 pandemic of e-commerce. So this also needs to be incorporated in firms on the new way of doing business, respecting health protocols, the process of digitalizing certain parts of the negotiation or certain parts of the business process, and also as we move through new ways of doing logistics and the delivery of goods. And through the USMCA, as Professor Melba, there's these new regulations that are coming into play. But I also see that this will bring a good opportunity for further regional integration. And even through the COVID-19, I think the Mexican suppliers and the Mexican location has been highlighted for its importance in dealing with shortages of certain goods and parts and components through the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is the end of my talk, and I would just move to these short-term challenges. As we were saying, new normal, stakeholders within the industry must start sharing information and some of the best practices, and this may also include some legal aspects. In terms of suppliers, as I was mentioning, strengthening of tier 1 and tier 2, training programs seems a good way to achieve this, as I was reporting from my findings. And in terms of human capital, well, there's this need of labor. There's labor shortage, especially in the region of Guanajuato and the western side known as El Bajío. So we must update to these new realities, remote working, developing certain soft skills through critical thinking, creativity, communication, and cooperation through digital platforms. And well, hard skills may be related to programming and advanced technologies. And finally, in terms of medium and long term, the industry does need to set a clear agenda. I think there needs to be a route that we need to follow to transition from just a manufacturing hub where we start adding or to higher value added activities, maybe related to design engineering or tool manufacturing. So as I was mentioning, thank you for your time, and I will move back to Professor Takeuchi. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much. So first of all, if you have any question, please write it in the Q&A box. We will discuss them as much as possible. So I'd like to start with my colleague, Jenny Apelte's question. So that is, so about the reshoring with the USMCA. So the point of USMCA or NAFTA is enhancing the competitiveness of North America vis-a-vis other regions, and especially like the competition with China, for example. And then, so she asks, what do the US and Mexico still need to do in order to attract more investment back and for more nearshoring to happen in the auto industry? So what US and Mexico should do to attract more investment in North America? And I'd like to add actually one more question to that. That is actually education in Mexico. So Melba's presentation shows that now with the wage requirement of USMCA, then like one choice is automobile industry are taking is moving suppliers to Mexico instead of the moving assembling stage to the United States. So so that case, what Mexico really needs is more skilled workers, right? So and to raise more skilled workers, the key is education. And this month, like we have a seminar by Texas Mexico Center that talks about actually more workers in Mexico are educated, more highly educated. And then actually immigrants from Mexico to the United States are more educated. That's actually the trend. But at the same time, question is, whether that trend continues, and then like how much Mexico is ready for raising education level of the workers. So I think like Leo toward the end talked about that issue. So could you talk about this? So that what like the US and Mexico should do to attract more investment in North America, and then also what the Mexican government should do to enhance the education level of the workers. So Melba, do you want to start? You have to unmute.
Sorry. Yes, okay. In terms of attracting more FDA from other countries, I think Mexico is already done its homework, because we do have already like 15 I think FTAs and agreements with the most developed countries in the world, the US, Japan, and Europe. And also we are member of CPTPP. And in those agreements, there is this clause about how to promote investment and how to give investment national treatment. And so that's the best way to do that. And on the other hand, for example, companies like Nissan has said, and also Toyota, I think, that the core markets from now on for these companies are North America, are Europe, Japan, and China. And so in that sense, North America is being considered already a very important market, and looking at it, as a region. not just the US, because as you said, the competitiveness of the impact of these global value chains network investment is to improve competitiveness in the three countries working together. And I think that has been achieved already. And right now, okay, to attract more investment in Mexico, investment has to have an environment of economic security and political, and I mean, and security in general. We have to work in that sense, you know. There are some problems in Mexico, as we know, and but I think in general we can say that there is a prone environment in order to attract investment through the network of FTAs that Mexico already has. And in terms of education, yes, I agree with you. We have to work together with government enterprises and the educational system in order to improve the skills of our workers. And well, Dr. Guzman knows more about this, but for example, Nissan is working with some technological institutes in the state of Aguascalientes that give training to the students of these technological institutes with internships in Nissan, for example. And other universities in the state of Guanajuato also are doing that, are working with Japanese enterprises and Japanese also universities in Japan, like Hiroshima University and Guanajuato University, have an agreement in order to give dual diploma to the students. And so I think we can replicate this kind of good practices that has been spotted through the cooperation chapter of the FDA with Japan, and to make it more general, I mean, from the public policy point of view, and to replicate that kind of models in the states, especially those that are receiving investment.
Thank you. Leo?
Yes, in terms of increasing investment, I think one a critical issue is also dealing with a very confusing legal system in our country. And sometimes, and this is something that I spoke with some Japanese company directors, they say it's quite confusing to make an investment in a Mexican site, because you have to deal first with federal laws, then you have to deal with state laws, and finally with local and municipal laws. So I think that's one issue that needs to be resolved. There needs to be a clear agenda on how these laws apply, and that they have certain logic within them, so it doesn't become an obstacle for future investment. I think that's one point. And in terms of enhancing levels of education, there has been interesting projects, not only the one that I reported here today. There's been also some interesting and achieving projects from the Mexican government side, but I think there needs to also need to be this communication between stakeholders, because sometimes some projects are just designed taking only the academic side, and maybe not taking into account the automotive firms or the government. No, so I think there needs to be a deeper communication on how we develop these student curricula, and also there's also needs to be clarity on what these students will achieve once they end their studies, because there's also a lot of engineers that are not being fully integrated in the labor force, and we also have this problem of brain drain, that leaves Mexico, especially those that are trained at the university or master's or PhD levels. So I think that's also something that needs to be talked about and addressed.
Thank you. We received a question from David Cam about rules of origin and how to calculate it. Let me answer that question very briefly. That is all the stages before that would be incorporated. So, so that's why it's very important for Mexico to have higher value added stages. Then in that way, it's much easier to satisfy wage requirement of USMCA, even if like Mexico takes the assembly stage too. So that's actually the shortest answer I can give. And then if like Melba and Leo, if you have anything to add, like please add it. But on the sake of time, I'd like to jump to the final question. That is actually I would like to build based on the question from Adam Brown, my student who is taking international political economy class right now. So so he says he sees an 80% of the manufactured cars in Mexico are exported. So does this increase the price of the vehicle domestically in Mexico? My answer is no, because it seems like the cars sold in Mexico and cars sold in the United States are very different. And then depending, so reflecting the consumers' preferences. And especially like I'm very impressed that there are so many Nissan, Nissan like running in Mexico are like mainly a Tsuru brand, right? So that's actually inexpensive, but high quality. But at the same time, Infiniti running in the United States are from also from Mexico, like mainly Aguascalientes plant, and then that is actually exported. So so I'm not worried about this issue, but I'd like to add like this question. So 3 years ago, when Tower Center and Texas Mexico Center organized the conference on Japan-Mexico-Texas relations. And one of my students who is from Aguascalientes asked the question of, so she's from Aguascalientes, that is actually where Nissan has 3 factories. And that's actually you can say the Nissan's town in Japanese called the Kigyo Jotamachi. So she said that her concern was well, global value chains are great, and then makes the production very efficient. However, she's concerned that then the city like Aguascalientes may be stuck in the lowest value added stage, that is assembling. And then like Aguascalientes may not enjoy the possibility of like taking a higher value added stage. So how would you answer that question? And what should Mexican government do to upgrade the kind of upgrade the level of the industrial structure? Melba, do you want to start?
Yes, in fact, I did some study about it, about what was the impact of the foreign direct investment in the states that are major recipients of flows of investment. And I was researching on the GDP growth in those states compared to the average of the country and to southern states in Mexico. And they were growing with their GDP was growing higher than the average of the economy. In fact, they called sometimes this the Asian states of Mexico, because like Aguascalientes, Querétaro, Guanajuato, San Luis Potosí, those states were growing like 5%, 4% compared to 2.5% of the economy. And so I would say that this investment has been, promoting growth in those states. And in Mexico, well, if we look at the whole country, there are big differences between regions. Southern is a different story, and those states are not recipients of foreign direct investment. And so I could say they have been a positive effect, and also positive effect on externalities from this investment, because other sectors become more competitive, like services, for example, services and hotels, restaurants, also housing and things like that, and even education, because there is education and health, there are more demand from the Japanese employees that are coming here to work in Mexico. And so I think that in general, there has been a positive effect on these economies that are, on these states that are recipients of investment. But of course, in terms of workers' income, we have to work more on education. And we do know that in Mexico, the informal sector is also very high, like 60% of the activities are in the informal sector. And I think in that sense, the investment in the transport equipment sector has made a good impact on the formal sector, given employment and mainly direct employment. I did some research on that too. And also compared with the manufacturing sector here includes 12 subsectors. And of those, the salaries paid by the transport equipment sector is 20% above the average of all 12 sectors. It means higher salaries for the workers working in the transport equipment sector. Yeah.
Thank you. Leo, the final words.
Yeah, I agree with what Professor Melo was mentioning. I think education is the key to move through these lower value-added activities into higher, maybe this related with design or tool engineering or certain things in this sense. And I think that recently there's been the opening of new research and development centers for the automotive industry in Mexico, and they have been very closely related with cluster associations, automotive cluster association, and I think that's also has been a very good ally for the industry, where these companies share information and they start to look for new ways of maybe moving up the value-added chain, and I think that could be something that the government needs to keep pushing in this sense. And I believe that could be one of the main issues. But as I mentioned before, there also needs to be clear opportunities for all those engineers that we are graduating each semester, that sometimes get stuck in like you mentioned, in these low value-added activities that are much below what they were trained for, and this will also bring this problem of brain drainage. So I think that's something that we need to work not only between the government but also the industry and also the academic sector.
Great, thank you very much. Well, we are in Texas, and we know that the relationship between Texas and Mexico is very important. But at the same time, we do not know much about the importance of Japanese investment in Mexico. So today, your discussion was very helpful to understand what is making Texas-Mexico relations work. So I really would like to thank two speakers, Dr. Melba Farouk and Dr. Leo Guzman. So please join me for thanking Texas big thanks for Dr. Farouk and Dr. Guzman. And now I bring back to Bora.
Thank you so much, Hiroki. And thank you so much to our amazing speakers. This is such an informative and great discussion. So we thank you for your time. And Hiroki, as always, thank you for being a great moderator. And to all audience, thank you for attending today. And please stay tuned to our website to look out for our fall programs that are happening in a few months. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.